November 9th, 2015. You ruined the Undertale fandom.
Aw, with 3 drawings. Thank you so much. Don't worry, I'll be there to ruin it even more.
Inksands. If you've been in the Undertale fandom for any amount of time, you would have come across him at some point. Whether it be fan art, fan fiction, fan animations, or in the very well animated series Underverse. You've probably seen this cheeky, ink-spewing, AU-protecting, AU fanboy artist skeleton. And his popularity is well-deserved. I mean, a sans that represents the creativity and love for the game that the fandom and its artists have would obviously be loved by said fandom, no? But who is Ink? What were his beginnings? How did we go from this to this? Well, let's go way back to 2016, where the Undertale fandom was just beginning to boom, and with it, where Inksands was born and practically grew in proportion with the fandom itself and rose to fame. Or maybe infamy? And warning, I won't be going to Ink's character outside of what has been said by his creator or confirmed by her to be canon or in character for him. So no real in-depth talk about him in Underverse or him in the Star Sands or anything like that. For this video at least. And anyway, I have like zero knowledge of Underverse since I have watched exactly 0% of it. So yeah, I have zero idea how he's portrayed in that anyway. As always, please make sure to use the timestamps if there's any specific area you want to look at, specifically. Now, let's get into it. Right, now to begin with, let's open up good old fandom wiki and... I mean, the wiki can be a little helpful for knowing where to start. Okay, no looking at the wiki at all for this one, and for anyone who does want reliable information on Ink, and a lot of reliable information on Ink, please check out the very helpful FAQ post made by his creator. It's literally one of the easiest posts to find on their Tumblr page. A lot of the information in this video is on there, but this video just includes some posts talking about the different points in more detail or some extra info that's, well, not really important enough to even put on there. But the FAQ is basically as good as, better than any wiki page you could find of him. Anyway, beginning with Ink's creator, Mye Bi? I really hope I'm saying this right. Anyway, Mye Bi had entered the fandom in 2015 at the ripe old age of 15. I mean, she hadn't told the internet her age until years later, and the only hint that we had of it was posts about her talking about school, but it still blows my mind how young she was at the time. Anyway, around November 11th, 2015, she made her side blog, which had its name changed to Comyet on December 18th, 2015. The name being a fusion of Comyet and her own name, an artist's name, which I think is kind of cute. Also, even though this is the blog she used to upload most of her Ink content, she did say she didn't really want to be known only as Comyet and wanted Mye Bi to be her artist name, so I'll continue to only refer to her as Mye Bi. Anyway, on November 11th, she posted quite a few posts, including this one, which today is the Ink FAQ post, but it's actually gone through a whole lot of editing over the years. And at the time of its posting, it actually looked like this. Just a general Tumblr blog rule post, until Ink came along. She actually started gaining a slight fan base in the Undertale fandom because of their AU, officially released on December 20th, called ZEPHYRTOP, which is basically Gaster Blasters being dragon companions for the monsters. And until the end of 2015 to the first half of January 2016, they were pumping out new content for this AU and gaining some attention because of it and their other Undertale art. Until a day that would forever change Undertale fandom forever came. Okay, maybe that's a little much, but January 17th, the very first post of Ink. Reading directly from the post, "Welp, this is Ink/Artist Sans. He's sort of a weird little guy, kinda managing the creation of new AUs in the dark, blushing emoji. When an AU gets created, he's there to help it come to life." Summarizing the rest of the post, he can make anything come to life with his brush, but not resurrect anything. He can appear anywhere in an AU, from any kind of liquid mixed with paint. He writes on his scarf and uses it to mix his colors, and he loves the imagination and diversity put into every AU. And we also see the first use of the term outcode in terms of the Undertale multiverse. And for anyone who didn't know, the terms encode and outcode were created by Mye Bi, which was a fun fact I wasn't expecting to find out when I was researching this. Anyway, from the get-go, Ink's character was pretty much set. Artist Sans that supports Undertale creators to create, hops around the AUs cause he loves how creative they are, you get it. Also important to note that Ink had never been intended to create any AUs, only protect them, despite how many people seem to think otherwise. The community very much welcomed Ink, but for more than just his unique concept. See, to explain partially why Ink blew up like he did, we need to talk about another Sans very briefly. Another Outcode Sans. Like Ink, it's near impossible to be in the Undertale fandom and not stumble across this glitchy mess of a Sans. Error. Error had been created in December, just a month before Ink, and was also massively popular. It didn't hurt that his creator, Crayon Queen, had also made Aftertale and the Multiverse Christmas Party. Anyway, for anyone who doesn't know Error's deal, he destroys alternate universes he deems as abominations. So when Ink pumped into existence, with him being another Sans that wants to protect AUs, of course people would start making links between him and Error. Not even a day after Ink was made public to the world, someone had already made an asking if he and Error were enemies. To which Mye Bi confirmed that Ink actually didn't know jack about Error, but welcomed people to explain Error to him. Still, the yin-yang dynamic potential fans of Error could see with the creation of Ink helped give Ink quite the popularity boost, with Mye Bi admitting a few times that Error had a big role in getting the word of Ink spread around the fandom and helping him gain traction. Well, not just with Error fans. A lot of people in the fandom really liked the idea of Ink, and less than a day after coming to existence, he was already getting fan art. Now, how did Ink come to be? Mye Bi says she had been trying to come up with a new concept she'd like in terms of a new Undertale AU after making ZEPHYRTOP. So she drew multiple different designs until she could think up something. Eventually, it started making her think badly about herself as an artist, and got frustrated with her work, so she decided to make something to cheer herself up. Then she came across a picture of a Japanese paintbrush, which I'm going to assume she was referring to an ink or calligraphy pen, and it got her doodling the concept of a sans crossed over with it, and thus Ink was born. She urges other artists not to force themselves to try come up with something if it doesn't come naturally, and instead try getting inspiration from something else to help you along like she had. So how did we go from this ink to this ink? To go over that, on February 4th, 2017, when asked about Ink's design, Mye Bi admitted that a few days prior to this, she had stumbled on an original character named Pen, whose design looked very similar to Ink's, and then she realized she had actually seen Pen before, and then realized she had accidentally been unintentionally inspired by Pen when she created Ink. She then talked to Pen's creator, and the creator had said it was fine, so she left Ink's design as is for the time being. The next year, in March, when asked if she had thought about changing Ink's look, she said she was satisfied with his design, though he does have alternate designs you can use for fan art of him, or fans could make new ones if they wanted to. Though during the Inktobertale event of 2018, which is a yearly art challenge event focused on ink, Mye Bi dropped this art of Ink, who was not only drawn in her new art style, but also had quite a few design changes compared to his initial design. When asked about it a few days later, she admits to now being interested in making an alternate design for him, but seeing both this new design and his current one at the time being valid for him. However, a year later, on December 23, 2019, she revisited the issue of Ink's original design and the inspiration for it again in much more detail, when another Anon mentioned the similarities between Ink and Pen. She explains again what happened in 2017 and how she contacted the Pokemon OC's creator, Cookie Hana, to clear up the issue clearly with a screenshot of the conversation. However, looking back on it years later with a more mature mindset after having forgotten about the issue, she felt she hadn't actually resolved the issue as well as she should have. So she contacted Cookie Hana again, apologized that she hadn't credited Cookie Hana for taking so many elements of her OC's design to use for Ink after talking about it in 2017, and how she should have changed Ink's design at that time. Mye Bi says that she wanted to make things right by not only crediting her now for Ink's design, but also making a whole new design for Ink. Cookie Hana responded by saying that she had also forgotten about the issue and also apologized, since, looking back, her own response was pretty short and seemingly uninterested. She continues to say that she still doesn't have any hard feelings on the matter, but would appreciate credit to avoid confusion and getting comments about this issue in her posts. They finished the conversation with Cookie Hana agreeing to let Mye Bi share the conversation publicly for all of us to see, and wishing each other a good festive season. Mye Bi apologizes to the people who are fans of Ink and his design for this whole situation, and that she wants to take responsibility of the actions she had done in her earlier teens. She announces she will be making that new Ink design and release it come 2020. And once January 4th, 2020 came around, we were gifted the new Ink design that we have today, which, oh my god, I absolutely adore this design. Mye Bi had actually looked into character and costume design before this, so yeah, it really shows. I'm a little sad that the jacket that Ink had was removed for the design, which in an earlier post she had said was one of the few ties Ink still had to being a Sans. But she had also said some people didn't really see Ink as Sans that strongly, so the loss wasn't a big one. Also, this outfit's just so clean and stylish, just gorgeous. I love it so much. I'm really glad that it's his new design, honestly. There's a whole lot of other notes about his outfit that I could go into, but I don't think y'all want to hear me yap about that for too long. Please check out her post about the new design if you want more details about the process of making it and other little details about it. Anyway, the new Ink hit the scene and his fans blew up with love with the design. So much so that Undertale ended up trending on Tumblr again, with people making tons of new Ink art. Also, the design started up a rather interesting little trend. Right, so now we know Ink's meta history, but what about his character's history? Like his design, Ink actually did go through a lot of changes from when he was created, growing and developing as Mye Bi and the fandom did. However, starting from his beginnings, Ink's backstory was released in a 6-part comic, with the first 4 parts being released from August 16th to August 23rd in 2016, the 5th on December 26th, 2016, and the finale on July 3rd, 2017. Originally, there were more parts planned to be made, but with Mye Bi's fading interest in Undertale as a whole, she decided to cut the comic short and give it an open and satisfying ending. Ahem. He had no name, nor did his world. He was a rough, a sketch, an attempt, a failed one, and so was his world. His creator gave them up again. After tries and tries, he grew tired of them again. One by one, the will to draw not succeeding became a chore, and he watched, powerless as he was thrown away, screams and pleading silent under paper. He was in a prison, his unfinished home. Either emotionless or giving up on their fates, his companions were already lost in deep numbness, while he stood in denial. They were now forgotten doodles, unappreciated concept sketches. Tale. No matter his attempts to make this blank world a better place, he was the only one who had developed feelings. He never got any answer. He was alone. The pain was unbearable. The feelings of loneliness grew on him more as the white void seemed to take him over. He was desperate. He called out for help. He never got any answer. He grew hateful over these other doodled characters. He grew insane even with the quiet calls of the people who cared. I don't want to be forgotten. I don't want to be left alone. I just want to be someone. And too deep in his sadness, he broke free. It was like a brand new start, a brand new chance, but he had no memory of his actions. He didn't remember what he had done or whoever he was. He was simply here, without soul nor purpose. So he sat here and didn't do a thing. And time, if it even existed, passed. What was he supposed to do? Why was he here? What was he? Despair, fear, without soul, without colors, he could feel nothing. And he waited, and waited, and waited. But he had yet to know his life was going to finally take its turn. When light finally reached his eyes, he was suddenly flooded with paint. Was this a color? It felt warm, reassuring. No, more than that. It was powerful, light but overwhelming all at once. And then it went into another color. Disgust, sadness, rage, plenitude, laziness, content. They were colors. Those were life, finally. A full rainbow in this empty, blank world. Suddenly, he felt happy. Suddenly, he felt. With feelings, such a powerful tool in hand, his abilities seemed to skyrocket. Each time he was flooded with a new wave of color, he took the opportunity to create his own. But whenever colors wouldn't appear for long, he found himself fading into this white blank again. It made him lose all personality he managed to build until they came back. To avoid this from happening, he came up with a solution. Each time the flow of colors would come, he would bottle every single one to keep feeding on the emotions they held whenever he needed. So he could feel on his own. So he could pretend to have a soul. Once he took control of his colors, he was finally able to have an impact on the world around him. It had its ups and its downs, its experiments, failings, successes. He found himself enjoying the life he was creating on his own, without really knowing who granted him powers of the kind or why, but putting it to good use nonetheless. He wasn't done on his discoveries though, not at all. He knew that being gifted with this ability was useless on his own, and perhaps he had to think bigger. And it seemed like the second chance was willing to open his eyes a second time. Thus the end of his story comic. Now it is his turn to write its new pages. In short, Ink originated from a discarded AU, felt so much despair in it that he literally tore apart his own soul and ended his own life and ended up falling into the void. With bits of binary code from the multiverse's core code ended up permanently marking his bones and then landed him in a blank space. Now soulless and resulting in him getting permanent amnesia about his past and memory problems from then on. His lack of a soul made it so he was cursed to never feel again, until a mysterious drop of paint granted him colors once more. But once those colors ran out, so did his ability to feel and function, so he made vials to contain the colors so he'd always have access to them. He then used his powers to create his world, aka the Doodleverse, which in short is like his own personal hub that he can use to see and visit alternate universes. And then he'd later go on to discover the multiverse even further beyond it. Ink's backstory is even more heartfelt when you realize the artist who struggled to come up with an AU, that artist who brought color into Ink's world, is meant to represent anyone, any creator for the fandom. While it is based on Mye Bi's experience, Mye Bi has made it clear that the person in the comic can be anyone. Tail could be any AU that doesn't exist, does exist, could exist, and also confirmed that Tail is a blank tail. Well, she even brought up that it would be funny if it was actually a silly comedic AU like Undertale in a grocery store or something. Anyway, Ink's story is meant to represent that your desire to create gave Ink his original life, and that joy of creation is what let Ink come back to life. Ink is who he is because of someone in the fandom. Maybe it's that one artist you like. Maybe it's the one fanfiction writer you like reading from. Maybe it could even be you. Deep down, Ink realizes that and wants to show his appreciation to all of us by protecting all the AUs that we've created and hold dear. Appreciating and keeping safe all the creations you made, just like how that creativity gave him feelings. Well, at least that's how I see it. Also, as good as any time to mention that Mye Bi never intended for Inktale to be a thing. Only Ink Sans specifically. But Inktale made for a convenient tag name to use for Ink Sans related content, so she used that. Inktale technically isn't a real AU. Also, Tail isn't the name of this AU either, just the name of Ink's original AU, with being the name Tail version of him has. Also, to anyone curious, there's another Ink official comic with him visiting Underswap that was cancelled, and another comic that was planned for Ink to visit Underfell that was also cancelled. He once planned to visit a lot of different AUs, but Mye Bi decided she wanted to focus on Ink's backstory comic instead, and didn't have the time or motivation to handle doing both of them. Well, now it's up to the fandom themselves to get Ink seeing all those AUs, which, well, they've definitely done. Anyway, abrupt topic change, let me take a moment to talk about Ink's dads. Introducing ZEPHYRTOP, a crossover between Undertop and ZEPHYRTALE, where their respective guest stars end up getting hitched. Canonically! I had scrolled through Mye Bi's account to get any scrap of information about this dynamic, and then realized she had made a very, very helpful post talking about everything all nice and summarized, so I will just be summarizing the parts of that. So feel free to read from the post itself for all the details she had in there. So basically, Undertop is an AU created on December 8th, 2015 by Styling Cheetah, where the monsters are part of a circus, where Gaster is the ringleader. However, there's a whole lot more to his history than just that. See, the Undertop universe was originally like original Undertale. Gaster, the father of Sans and Papyrus, was the royal scientist. He focused on studying the boundaries and anomalies of their world to find a way to get the monsters out of the underground. Long story short, he makes an unstable portal and ends up falling into it. He is then stuck between the void and his own world, only being able to see the world continue without him, seeing everyone forgetting about him over time, with the exception of his sons. But with no way to contact them, he has no choice but to just settle for now. Ending up in this limbo state allows for Gaster to end up gaining the self-awareness of an outcode character, and finding out about the resets and code manipulation and retaining his memories of previous resets. With this new knowledge, he begins taking apart the code of Undertale bit by bit. Then Frisk/the player comes in and keeps playing the game repeatedly over and over, toying with the timeline as they went from pacifist routes to neutral ones and then eventually to genocide. Gaster tries to stop them and eventually stumbles on fun values, which ends up helping him trigger a reset of his own, causing a complete upheaval of the world itself, resulting in the world being rewritten into Undertop. Gaster is finally able to reunite with his kind, though with the consequence of Asgore's death being made permanent, so Gaster becomes the ringleader of the circus Undertop is set in. Gaster and Sans are the only two that remember the past timelines, which would have been a fun father-son bonding moment if Sans didn't hold little but contempt for his father for abandoning him in favor of focusing so much on his work. Despite Gaster wanting to repair their bond, animosity between them ends up building instead. Gaster discovers he actually has quite the talent for acting and learns to love being a ringleader. However, he also finds his new accomplishments menial compared to being a scientist like he used to be, so he begins researching into other outcodes and researching his world again, but acting oblivious to how aware he is of everything, to avoid getting attraction from other possible outcode characters who'd want to harm his new AU. It's during this that he ends up meeting Ink, who he discovers shares a lot of the same nihilistic and cynical views as he does. Gaster becomes attached to him, and the two grow close. Gaster talks to Ink about the issues he has to face from his hallucinations and nightmares from his past as being an outcode character to having to remember the genocide routes in Undertop. Ink is curious about Gaster not embracing his outcode state and wanting to blend in as an in-code character in his AU, but relates to wanting a concrete place in the world. Gaster takes Ink under his wing and begins seeing Ink as a part of his own family. In turn, Gaster also becomes a father figure for Ink, who he holds in special regard. Ink calling him Big Top, and Gaster calling him Inkling. Ink even helps out in the circus, using his paint to help make fancy outfits for Gaster's shows, earning Ink the title of Tailor of Undertop, receiving art supplies for every outfit he completes for the Undertop crew. As thanks for that, Gaster even ends up making Ink his own official Undertop outfit, which he adores. Now onto ZEPHYRTALE. Gaster, who's eventually called Aster, is also a real scientist, located in the kingdom that the monsters live in, with the monsters living on the surface in this AU. He begins becoming overwhelmed with his responsibilities, not just as the royal scientist, but also as the caregiver to his two brothers, Sans and Papyrus, especially with Sans' declining health. Like mentioned before, ZEPHYRTOP is an AU where gas blasters are kinda like skeleton dragons called blasters. He ends up experimenting with a special blaster's DNA that was named Kara, that would have helped improve the speed of medical research, and eventually ends up testing it on himself to try find a way to stabilize Sans' condition. The DNA ends up taking over, resulting in his DNA melding with it and half transforming him into a blaster because of it. He ends up being exiled for what he had done. Now, with a blaster corrupted soul and in critical condition, he eventually ends up accompanying a gigantic blaster named hold on. Betelgeuse? I hope I'm saying that right. Living in a tower in an area with a high number of wild blasters, where he finds remnants of astronomy machinery and tools that leads to him studying the stars, devoting himself to this work now. Okay, so how the crossover happened? There was a Mega Gaster crossover event made by Styling Cheetah, who's Undertop's creator, and that event caused an in-universe event that caused the codes of certain AUs to merge. This causes Aster, ZEPHYRTOP's Gaster, to end up in Undertop. Since Undertop Gaster was an outcode character, he realized there was an anomaly in his world and goes in search of it. After he realizes Aster doesn't pose a threat to his AU, Gaster allows Aster to stay in his world with them. The two discover that they share a lot of their experiences and similarities, which leads to Gaster trusting Aster enough to explain the multiverse and outcodes to him. And then some heavy stuff happens that has to do with Undertop's Kara basically being a malevolent hidden threat to Undertop and trying to control Aster because his soul contains remnants of her alternate self soul, even if that alternate self is a blaster, and that leads to Aster and Undertop's world ending up endangered. Ink realizes that there's an anomaly, so goes in, gets Aster the fuck out of there, and back into his own AU. Since Gaster and Aster parted on difficult terms, Gaster decides to go searching for him and ends up finding ZEPHYRTOP and ends up in the tower that Aster lives in. The two reunite, bond properly, and then feelings start blooming. They then confess their feelings and Gaster continues visiting ZEPHYRTOP. Ink does also end up forming a bond with Aster because of this. Aster ends up developing a desire for learning about the multiverse as he's exposed to more knowledge about it, and develops a passion for studying it with Ink's help. Ink develops a fondness for learning how to do things without relying on his creative powers, including building machinery and studying astrophysics because of Aster. Aster, like Gaster, also begins to see Ink like a part of his family. However, despite caring for both of them greatly, Ink still holds his duty as an AU protector very seriously, and is aware Gaster has the ability to alter code, so warns Gaster that if he tried altering ZEPHYRTOP's code or timeline for Aster's sake, Ink would be there to cancel any edits he tries to do. And that threat does end up having to be used since one day Gaster ends up visiting ZEPHYRTOP while one of its possible endings was being played out. This ending had Aster in very critical condition. Gaster unintentionally disturbs the scripted events for it and causes Aster to unexpectedly pass away. Ink, despite his own feelings on the matter, comes in and brings Gaster to the Doodlebush to try reason with him, but Gaster is inconsolable. After days of mourning, Ink then introduces Gaster to a new AU. While Ink doesn't create AUs, ZEPHYRTOP and Undertop's creators decided to create one themselves, assigning Gaster to be listed as his official creator and moderator. This AU is called ZEPHYRTOP. When Gaster enters this new AU, The two casters reunite, with Aster's code having been brought over into ZEPHYRTOP. They decide to live in this AU where they're free to moderate the code freely, which was a parting gift from their two creators according to Ink, to make up for all the pain they had gone through. The two let the original alternate universes reset so new versions of them could take their place, and they could continue living in peace in ZEPHYRTOP. Basically, they live happily ever after, with most of Undertop's troop going to live there. Aster's Tower, the Blasters, and ZEPHYRTALE Sky being copied and imported into ZEPHYRTOP with Ink's help, Aster's soul eventually getting healed, and the two casters getting married, their anniversary being celebrated on March 5th. Also, Ink is their official biggest supporter. Having been their wedding's officiant, their honeymoon planner, he made their house. He's also probably one of the worst officiants to have for a wedding, since he sat cross-legged on the desk, mixed up the book he was supposed to read, skipped over text he was supposed to read, and literally questioned the parts he was reading the whole time. Quote, "You two must be sure that you are both standing here for mutual consent." This is the dumbest sentence I ever read, I swear. Who wrote this? End quote. At least he made the wedding memorable. Now onto the part of the video we've all been waiting for. Talking about the skeleton of the hour himself. Ink! Like, character-wise. From his creation, Ink had gone through quite a lot of changes and developments. I had a lot of information about Ink going into this. Some of it probably a lot more useless than others. So this will basically be split into two sections. One focusing on Ink's personality and his views on not just himself but the multiverse around him. The second will be just facts and trivia about him that, to my knowledge, are canon. From well-known big ones to ones that probably that aren't that important but are also pretty fun to know about him, like Mye Bi made a canon that his gaster blasters are called Goopster Bloosters. So stick around for more fun little facts like that. So, in the beginning, Ink was just the excitable, cute version of Sans that just supported AUs and was an artist. Originally, the first version of his post was a lot more bare. Going over this information of Ink manages the creation of new AUs and supports artists so they can continue contributing to the Undertale fandom. Since, well, Ink depends on the fandom being productive to continue living. He can travel into any alternate universe through any liquid as long as it has paint mixed in. And he has the ability to draw anything with his paint, his only limit being bringing the dead to life. His goal is to fight against art blocks, which is represented as a physical enemy he can fight against, so AUs can continue thriving in peace. Ink tends to get excited about things, and it leads to him rushing into things before thinking it through, including into AUs. He also suffers from amnesia, which causes him to forget what he's saying mid-sentence sometimes, so he uses a scarf to write notes on what he wants to remember. He also uses a scarf to mix colors together. His forgetfulness also makes it so he forgets he's supposed to stay away from AUs and ends up getting involved in them. Ink is very passionate about art and motivating people to create more, but when he gets too passionate about something, he ends up throwing up ink. No one's ever seen his drawings before, but he does like changing people's clothes with his paint into whatever they want. He's also a joker and wants to make people laugh. But the only problem with that is that he's a jerk, and his jokes are kinda bad. Above all, Ink sees no point in harming anyone, not wanting to kill anyone or disturb the timelines of different AUs. Of course, that's just all the information we had of him a few days after he was created. Lots and lots of new details about him were added onto him over time to make him a more rounded and complete character, including his backstory and a deeper look into his personality, shaping his personality to better fit his backstory. 2017 onwards was when we really got to know Ink on a deeper level. not to say that 2016 wasn't important to learning about Ink. For example, details about him established in 2016 was that the position Ink made for himself is basically being the cop of alternate universes, protecting them and making sure their timelines proceed how the creator wishes for them to, without any interference from anomalies. Also, again, pointing this out, Ink doesn't create AUs. The closest thing to creating an AUs he does is making portals to them in his doodle sphere. Ink also has the ability to feel disturbances when an AU needs his help, since his short-term memory would make it difficult to find anomalies any other way. He also loves all alternate universes and loves all parts of them, from the good to the bad to the freaky. Also, it's canon that if you've done literally anything NSFW related to Undertale, including any weird roleplays, please know, Ink knows your sins. It also means that if an alternate universe has the characters fighting for their lives and in never-ending agony, Ink would just watch on in amusement. It's not like he can't help them, he just won't. The law he enforces as a protector is that if it's not by the creator's doing or choice, then he has to put a stop to it. Otherwise, he doesn't interfere. He doesn't see it as his or anyone else's right, but the creator's, to say how an AU is gonna end up. Two examples of how his protecting works is like with the Christmas party event done by Crayon Queen. Since it happens in Geno's house and in his multiverse planned by his creator with the approval of other creators, Ink sees no need to put a stop to it. However, like in ZEPHYRTOP's backstory, since the Tailgaster's death was caused by Undertop Gaster messing with the code, without it being the will of either their creators, Ink had to step in and remove all his edits immediately. Without the creator's permission, Gaster has no right to change anything in ZEPHYRTOP in Ink's opinion. His first priority is always thinking of the artists and creators of any AUs, since the thing that makes Ink happiest is, to quote Mye Bi, who was roleplaying as Ink, seeing people being creative and believing in themselves enough to keep walking forward. Seeing that you can make yourselves happy with your creations. I hope you guys can all taste this feeling someday. It's why I'm alive, and it's the best thing I could ever ask for. So basically, AU crossovers are A-okay as long as the creators permit for them to exist, and the original universes are kept safe. That's not to say he's just unaffected when deaths do happen within the canon of alternate universes. An example of this is a comic made by Mye Bi and Styling Cheetah, depicting Ink's reaction to Gaster dying in one of the routes in Undertop, mourning his loss but not preventing it since it was scripted for him to die, as well as his reaction to his revival during a reset. No matter how important the characters in the universe are to Ink, even if they're the closest thing to a family to him, he would always stick to his own morals over his own personal feelings. A fanfiction for him that Mye Bi decided to illustrate for had Undertale as the first AU he had ever witnessed, which was then made canon to be the first AU he ever encountered, that he still holds dearly to him, but it's not his favorite, since Ink doesn't have a favorite or least favorite AU. Ink also doesn't really view himself as a sans, even if he knows that he is a version of him, since as far as he knows, he doesn't belong to any universe. Then his backstories began coming out, and really began to unfold his character even more. In fact, one of his most well-known facts today, the colored vials on his sash, wasn't revealed to give him the ability to experience emotions until after his backstory comic addressing this was revealed at the end of 2016, almost a year after he was first revealed, and only having that fact added onto his FAQ after that. Also, like mentioned, the backstory revealed that Ink is considered dead. Living meaning having a soul, and without one, Ink is essentially deceased. After these revelations, Miyubi made it clear that Ink's view on things were a lot more bleak, I think is the best word to use here, than what we originally assumed. For one, Ink intentionally separates himself from other monsters since monsters in his eyes are beings that have souls and, well, are alive, and Ink doesn't and isn't. Mayuki points out that in a roleplay she did with Undertop's creator, Ink goes out of his way to say that he loves monsters, in a way to imply that he himself wasn't one, which ended up freaking out Aster. The divide also allows him to have a distant perspective on everything. Boy doesn't even remember why he doesn't have a soul, just that he doesn't and that it separates him from everyone else, which is like so sad. What the heck? Also, Ink is very much aware that Undertale is a game, that he himself is just some alternate version of the character Sans. Hell, he's aware of the creators as individuals beyond the fourth wall, with him being aware of who Crayon Queen is, aka Error and Genos and Fresh's creator, and fangirling over her, calling him a cutie. Whether he can actually see them is up for interpretation though. I think it's this knowledge of the multiverse that he has that makes him view everyone else the same way that we do, as nothing more than characters. See, after the release of the fifth part of his backstory, Mayubi absolutely unleashed the floodgates on the psychology of Ink. She explains further that Ink sees them all, that being all the other characters from other alternate universes in the multiverse, like how any of us would look at an art book or comic book, appreciating the work put into them and the characters, but not the same level as you'd appreciate another human being. And on the topic of genocide routes in AUs, or just characters suffering in their AUs, Ink views it the same way as a fan in the series would when their blowers are thrown into heart-wrenching plot lines, disconnected but still causing a weird sort of sick thrill from watching it happen. Even in terms of Undertop Gaster and ZEPHYRTOP Gaster, the two characters he views as guardians, parental figures, aren't exempt from this. Of course, Ink holds them highly, but it's more like he views them as his favorites above all the other characters in the AUs. Even with their deaths, it's like if one of us were to happen to see our favorite Blorbo die in a show we really like. I mean, people cry over things like that, so it's not a surprise that Ink would also cry over that, even if he only saw them as characters. And even beyond just seeing them as that, there's more to his disconnected views on the other AU characters than just that. That being his soullessness. Okay, bear with me because I'm gonna do my best to explain this as best as I can, but I think there's some parts that I might have gotten mixed up or confused. So basically, Ink was technically supposed to just be an empty shell of a skeleton, since no soul means no life. Like seen in his backstory, if he's left alone without the colors that he receives, he ends up losing his color and basically becoming a corpse. It's revealed he can't emote, he can't talk, he can't move, he can't feel or even think. But after having the fandom's creativity represented in that colorful paint bring him emotion again, those vials of paint basically let him have a fake soul. Of course, we know that he needs to drink from specific ones to feel specific emotions, and he can take a little bit of all of them so he can have access to all the emotions at once. But thing is, these emotions don't really come up completely involuntarily to him. Ink has to manually draw them up when the situation calls for it, so he can be as close to acting and reacting like a relatively balanced normal person would. But that's the thing. Even if he can technically feel them, his emotions are, at the end of the day, fake. And when someone asked Mye Bi if ink has no soul, how is he able to care for someone? Mye Bi replied, "You have your answer in your question." So, what about literally everything we just talked about? Caring about AUs, about the creators, even about the other AU characters, even if it's as story characters. Well, Ink was given new life because of the fandom through the colors he collects in his vials. Those colors let him do anything having a soul would let him do. Talk, think, use his magic, feel. In a sense, the fandom itself is his soul. Without the colors from the fandom, he becomes a husk, and if the fandom dies, Ink dies with it. And of course, like any monster with a soul, Ink would want to protect his own, hence wanting to protect the fandom and those that keep it alive. As explained more directly by Mye Bi on why he protects the AUs, Ink has to protect them because without them, he ceases to exist. His protection for them goes beyond his own feelings on the AUs themselves. He knows that AUs come from the creativity and inspiration of artists, and that same creativity is represented by the colors he drinks, the same colors that keep him going. And in another post, she says the emotions he feels and the emotions specific people make him feel are tied, and it works with AUs. You could even say that even though he doesn't remember his past, he has a feeling in his non-existent gut that tells him these creations are meant to last because it's fair. They were created whether it was their choice or not, so they deserve a chance. But honestly, since he's such a fourth wall breaking character, he cares more about the creativity that was put into the AU's context and design and mechanics, etc., rather than how the characters themselves actually feel. He'd mostly think it's a waste if they're created then forgotten. And he doesn't want to feel lonely, so he had to find himself a purpose. So I'll be honest, I didn't really think Ink's desire to protect AUs wasn't just they're so cool and creative, but also I literally need to or I die. Well, Undertale creators keep creating or Ink dies. But then it brings into question, if it takes him having to continuously keep consuming these colors to even feel anything, does he actually have thoughts and feelings towards anything? Well, one thing that pops up a lot when it comes to Ink is pretending, lying. Ink has to do a whole lot of that to the world and to himself. He doesn't need to eat, to sleep, to drink, or breathe, and when he does, that's all pretend. Also, delving even further with his relationship with the Gasters and just any relationships he wishes to build on. When someone asked if he was just pretending to care about them, Mye Bi explains that she'd love to think that deep down inside, he does have a feeling of wanting to be attached to someone, but the colors he consumes are what dominates his behaviors and feelings. If Ink doesn't keep them balanced, then the link he does have with his dads won't make sense to him anymore. As long as he continues to consume those colors though, he can get as close as possible to a relatively balanced normal person, and he's able to construct relationships with other people like anyone else. But a part of it is definitely just pretend. But then, what's even the point of having to keep pretending like this? Maybe for Ink, pretending is better than feeling nothing. Or maybe not, his choices aren't always good. There's something really saddening about the idea of Ink just being completely separated from everyone else around him, having no one else truly experience, quote, living like he does. He can't relate to other monsters in general, and he has no real AU to relate to the other characters living in it. He can't even really relate to other outcode characters since he also still sees them as nothing more than characters. I sure hope I managed to explain that all right. It literally took me a couple of days just to figure out this section alone. And my oompies on Blue Sky have been seeing me struggle. I just really wanted to do justice on this section because, boy, let me tell you, when I was learning all about Ink's character, I really got more interested in him than I expected. It can be a bit of work to piece all together, but boy, was it worth it. Anyway, we aren't ending this video on this kind of pessimistic view on Ink. I want to end this section reading from a post Mye Bi made on how she interprets Ink. Ahem. To me, Ink is the goofy, super confident, and optimistic skeleton who will try to take every serious situation into a huge joke. Some people make him overreact when they write him in their scripts, but that's actually not how he behaves. He's always smiling and playing the badass idiot. He wants to make friends with everyone. He wants to meet everyone. He wants to help everyone. Even if they're clearly bad like Error, Underfell Sands, or Nightmare Sands, whatever. Because he knows that even though he's a part of an AU, we are watching our creations from afar, and that gives him a sort of feeling of responsibility. He's just very unpredictable. And stupid. Also said by Mye Bi is that Ink can be terribly selfish and disconnected. He can be calculating and distant. But he can also be very helpful, motivational, and happy-go-lucky. He has a choice to be whatever he wants. This is what makes him feel off. Yet, at the same time, it can make him very enduring. He deals in emotions in very unusual ways. He's not just a devil in disguise. Despite everything we read about the inner workings of his mind, I find it fun that Ink still acts like an absolute goofball, and that wants to make friends because that's how he wants to be perceived and seen by others, and how he just wants to act. But his darker sides give him a lot more sides to him that make him feel more like a three-dimensional character. You know, despite him originally being a drawn two-dimensional one. Ayy. Now we're moving on to the facts and trivia section to lighten things up. Kinda. In order of more like big character important facts to more silly ones. Ink originally fought against literal embodiments of art blocks, which Mye Bi envisioned as piles of white paint taking over everything, but never drew herself to leave up to interpretation. Ink's evolution over the years and how undecided Mye Bi had been over the concept of art blocks led to them being removed from the FAQ. It was switched to him using his brush to limit the damage done by other outcode characters who want to disturb the scripts of AUs. The doodle sphere was also changed, with it originally being a huge sky composed of floating islands, and on each one, there is a door opening to an AU, and all the other doors who are alternatives of that AU. Each island is themed with the atmosphere and/or nature of that AU. The islands have since been replaced with paint buckets to better fit Ink's aesthetic. Ink has a mirror room that was apparently a concept from Undertop. It can only be entered through teleportation, and when inside, a character would be able to interact with the AU versions of themselves through the mirrors. Ink would be willing to bring characters there if they wanted, but he himself isn't fond of bringing people there too often, and even cleans the room himself most of the time. The whiteness that Ink is afraid of isn't just the color white itself, but a metaphorical kind of white. Like the idea of the void itself, with it being the lack of color, based on Ink's version of colors at least, and I'm going to assume it being like the representation of like an unfinished blank page, which is just plain white. White is used to represent emptiness in its purest form, which is what he's actually afraid of. Despite wanting to make friends, Ink doesn't get attached to people easily and uses friendly facades for any person he meets. But if he does get attached to someone, which Mye Bi knows is officially just his dad's for now, the bond will last through thick and thin. Bonding isn't really helped by the fact that he tends to forget people easier than becoming friends with them, and also the fact that he's a jerk. Ink prefers working alone and doesn't actually like having constant company. He would work with others if he knows it'll be more efficient for specific tasks though. Also, while I'm trying to avoid talking about AUs that aren't canon to Ink's development, in terms of him in the star stanzas, Mye Bi thinks it's a cute concept, but Ink would be a bit distant if he was in a group like that. As in, he would mostly enjoy traveling in a group for a while rather than actually fighting for justice. He's not really convinced that his partners always do useful things and fight against the right things, but he'd go along with it anyway because it's a game to him. This creepy supportive skelly man. One big reason why Ink isn't interested in romantic relationships is because, to quote Mye Bi, imagine if he ever got into a relationship and forgot the feeling of love. That would be awful. He wouldn't engage in anything because of that reason. He knows it would hurt people. Frowny face. Also, he can be very irresponsible, Lamau. Despite being Arrow Ace with zero interest in relationships, Ink would have zero judgment over who you wanted to ship him with. Ink is one of the biggest AU fanboys you'll ever meet. Like, seriously. Mye Bi helped promote other AUs by having Ink fanboy over them. Bro even cheered on his own opponent in the 2022 Sans AU Sexy Polls, since Underfill Sans is his little meow meow, so of course he'd want him to win. Which caused him to feel split since his fans wanted him to win and he always wants to support the fandom, so... One of the first Ink facts that was established was that calling him small pissed him off. Then Mye Bi revealed that he actually doesn't really care about that and just like making it a big deal. And then revealed that reacting like that just helped make him seem less soulless. He does, however, actually shrink if you do keep calling him small. Ink travels through all forms of liquids into AUs. If the liquid is frozen, he either gets stuck or busts through it like Kool-Aid Man. If there's no liquid in the AU to get in, he has scissors he can use to make a breach, but doesn't like using them because he'd feel like he had to sew it up and would be grumpy about having to do it. While Ink is curious about fandoms outside of Undertale when he sees crossovers between them, he currently can't visit any universes that have no ties with Undertale. If you manage to get his brush, he'll just manage to cry and use the ink in his tears to make a new one. And even if you did manage to get his brush, it's heavy for everyone but him, so good luck using it. The markings that he got from the void were made to intentionally look like DNA. Ink is ambidextrous, but has a tendency to use his left hand more. Ink blushes in rainbow. Ink also cries in rainbow. Kind of. Ink's tongue is rainbow colored. When Ink is really happy, rainbow freckles appear all over his face and he starts floating. His favorite food is the entire emoji section, so he likes all foods, even burnt food. The reason he likes burnt food is because he knows he doesn't have to fight anyone for it. To get dressed, he just dumps ink on himself and it paints the clothes on for him. Ink's default magic color was white/transparent, but it was switched to dark brown and black to match the color of, well, actual ink. Ink loves drama and is not afraid to admit it. If Ink had to have a nationality, he'd be French, to match Mye Bi. If Ink was assigned a Harry Potter house, he'd be Gryffindor. He has fangs. He's a punner. He's also a memer. He prefers brushes to pencils. His spirit animal is a weasel. His favorite animal are squirrels. His favorite candy is rainbow-colored candy floss. He doesn't have a favorite color. He isn't a dog or cat person. He likes them both. He would smooch a ghost on the cheek. He likes both day and night. Ink can't be hypnotized. While we know Ink doesn't create AUs, and while he didn't actually do this, it would be in character for him to spread the rumors that he did create AUs for shits and giggles, forget that he did that, and wonder why everyone thinks he does that. Ink's rating on both an innocent scale and drift scale is a solid 5 out of 10. Ink's reaction if he ended up in hand plates and seeing Gaster torturing children.
Bullshit, what up?
Ink's reaction if he ended up in Underlust.
Bullshit, what up?
Ink's reaction if he met a murderous god.
Bullshit, what up?
Okay, is there any AU he would react differently to? Yes, Undertop. Because when he sees Gaster, he'll...
Here comes that bull.
But genuinely, otherwise, if it's an AU, he...
Oh shit, what up?
You can really tell these were asked in the mid-2010s. Ink is like if fandoms had personifications like Hetalia, and he represented the Undertale fandom. Okay, that one's just my own view of him. Alright, I admit it, I ended up liking Ink a whole lot more than I ever imagined researching for his video. Maybe because he reminds me of another character whose cheerful demeanor hides something more underneath. I really love the direction Mye Bi ends up deciding for Ink in the end, and that wasn't just excited artist sense. And I'm just gonna say this off script, but while I was reading this, I had thought of, oh, I should add this part in. I forgot to add it in the script. And guess what happens? I forgot about it. And now I can't. It was supposed to be in the trivia section, but I forgot. So, that's fun. I'll add it in the comments if I ever remember what I wanted to say, but I doubt I will. Okay, I'm editing. I remembered. I wanted to say that another Ink fact is the fact that he has one AU that he is uncomfortable with, but it's never been said which one. Thank you. Anyway, like I mentioned in one of my community posts, I think, I want to make videos on like the more important stanzas and papyruses before I even consider tackling anything related to them interacting with each other, like in the multiverse. So I'll probably be focusing on the AUs that have stanzas that make up the bad stanzas and the star stanzas for now, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, thank you everyone for not just watching this episode this far, but for subscribing and liking and commenting on my videos. All your support means the world to me. If you want to see my next video, please subscribe. If you want to support the channel, please consider looking at my Patreon. And as always, take care.